The government did officially shut down at the very start of October. So here we are on October 9th, and we are still in the same boat. Afternoon, we have some interesting stuff to cover here this week, although it might be a little bit shorter since we have a government shutdown in place, which will be one of the topics we'll cover, as well as the Fed meeting minutes that we received just yesterday on Wednesday. I'm Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group, and our goal is to leave you feeling more empowered after every interaction. And we bring this update to you every Thursday to hopefully share some of the market news, data, trends that we're watching. And one of them, unfortunately, will not be covered today. So on Friday last week, we were supposed to get non-farm payrolls or U.S. employment report data to end the week of jobs data that we had received there to start off October. Well, the government shutdown affects this number. And so as a result, we did not get this data point last week. We'll continue to monitor this as time goes on, of course, but very interesting timing, because you might remember the ADP employment report last week did show some challenges, to say the least. And so I was very interested to get this report, but with the government shutdown, this affects some of the data that we receive as well. So no U.S. employment report for this past month at the moment. All right. The big thing I want to cover, and again, we will do a question of the week about the government shutdown and what that could mean, has meant, could mean moving forward here as well. But the big thing before we really get into our question of the week is about the Fed minutes on Wednesday. So just yesterday, the Fed meeting minutes were released. And I don't know that there's a whole lot of surprise in this, really. A little bit of a divided Fed, generally speaking, but most had really signaled that they expect 2 more rate cuts or a couple more rate cuts by the end of the year. This was exactly what was really mentioned in the press conference to follow the meeting. Again, I think that they will follow the data. So if there's a glaring reason to change that path, I do believe that they would. But it was communicated pretty clearly that without any glaring reason to adjust, that's likely the path they're heading down. I would say that the Fed meeting minutes really reinforce that to a degree. Let's see. Another thing to keep in mind out of this was just a lot of concern around the job side of things. So unfortunately, we do not have the jobs number from Friday, but that seems to be the theme as well, as a lot of Fed members were concerned around where jobs could be going in the direction of the labor market. And, really a lot of concern still around inflation too. So I think maybe the big takeaway from this, that's maybe above and beyond what was covered before, although maybe just an expansion of what was covered before, is that the Fed is still very concerned about inflation, but cutting regardless. And very just interesting place to be, because again, they're looking at inflation and jobs as their primary 2 areas. And they're concerned about inflation picking up, yet cutting rates because they're really concerned about the labor market. So we'll continue to keep an eye on this. Obviously, the data on the labor market is going to be really critical, but so is inflation. So be sure to tune in next week. We're going to cover, we actually get CPI and PPI data next week. So we'll have some inflation numbers to go over, but we also get retail sales as well, which will give us a little bit of a glimpse into how the consumer is doing through all this as well. All right. But before we break here this week, we have a great question of the week from Julie, which is really about this government shutdown and what it could mean moving forward and what it has meant looking backwards. So just as a quick bit of a recap, the government did officially shut down at the very start of October. So here we are on October 9th, and we are still in the same boat. Now, what I will share is since then, the markets have really reacted actually positively. In fact, I believe when the announcement was made, we saw markets pick up a little bit on the news. I don't think it was necessarily because of that, but it was just an interesting, relationship that we saw between the two figures there. Now, what I will share is that I think, so generally, historically, this is not the first time, of course, we've gone through a government shutdown. Historically, this has generally meant markets got a little bit antsy. This time, not the case. Now, today, markets are down a little bit, but we hit new all-time highs here recently. So again, markets have shrugged this off so far. I think the reason for that is because this is not the first time, and unfortunately has become more and more of a normal situation lately. And so I think the markets are kind of recognizing that. And when we run into these shutdowns, maybe not reacting as quickly, because if it is a short-term shutdown, there's not a lot of big impacts on the economy. Okay, short-term shutdown, not a lot of big impacts on the economy. However, The longer this goes, the more challenging this can be. So there's been a number of shutdowns. Most of them have been resolved pretty dang quickly. This one, again, we're a little over a week into at this point, and we are not at a resolution quite yet. So the longer this goes on, I think the more antsy the markets will be. The reason for that is obviously, jobs and consumers really drive a lot of our economy here in the US. And without government employees, that is a lot of people concerned about income, probably not spending, and so on. On top of that, of course, we do miss some data points too, right? We had the non-farm payrolls, or the unemployment and employment report that we missed as a result of this too. So we also don't get quite the same amount of data as we might typically. So again, there are some challenges the longer this goes on, and time will tell, I guess, is the short version of this. So it is good to be aware of this. It is good to be prepared as time shifts. I don't think it's one day the markets are going to wake up and react to it necessarily, but the longer this goes on, we might see the markets get a little more antsy and, potentially price in how this could affect the economy as a whole. From what I'm hearing, it doesn't sound like we're really close to a resolution. We'll continue to watch that, but I'm sure you've turned on the news as well, and it's exhausting. It doesn't matter what side you're on. Both sides it's just very frustrating to see them just kind of combat with each other and blame the other when we both know they're both at fault. So it is exhausting to watch it. We'll continue to keep you up to date, but for the most part, it's just a lot of political posturing at the moment. And again, has not affected markets too much up to this point, but just keep in mind the longer this goes on, it certainly can and likely will. So we'll continue to keep you posted here. It's a great time to make sure we're watching closely on what this means and keeping an eye on the markets so that we can pivot if we don't already have some defense in place as well. That might be my general takeaway from the shutdown here. So be sure to tune in next week. Again, next Thursday, we're going to cover inflation data as well as retail sales. But in the meantime, have a great upcoming weekend, and we will see you next Thursday at 3.